Hi guys, Geekonomics here, and today I am bringing you a revision video for GCSE Economics, and this is for paper A593, which is of course the third and final paper in the GCSE and the one for which you get the stimulus material. I've already done figures 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and so today I'm going to do the final figures 6, 7, 8 and 9. If you haven't seen the videos which I've done already and some of the materials which are provided in the form of practice revision questions and so on, do have a look around and I'm sure you'll be able to find them. Okay, so this is figure 6, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot of data here on this map with regard to the European Union, obviously a very hot potato and a hot topic at the moment. We have EU members using the euro, EU members not using the euro, and the non-EU countries. And then listed beneath this table we have a list of all of those countries. So first thing is, with regard to this, there'll be some easy questions to start, some as simple as can you name and identify two countries which use the euro? Can you identify a country which does not use the euro? Can you identify a country which is a member of the European Union? All of this type of thing. Very straightforward questions like that will probably form the basis of the initial questions to this particular data set, figure 6. Now I have produced for you again this Word document, and I've identified for you on the Word document the particular areas of the specification which the particular figures in your stimulus material are assessing. So for this particular one, this figure, and following on into figure 7, which is also tied into it of course, then I think these are the areas of the specification which are being assessed, and so these are the areas of the specification which you need to concentrate on. Number 1, identify the member countries of the EU and the Eurozone. I mean, this has already been done for you in figure 6, so it's just a question of lifting that out. Explain, directive word, and evaluate, directive word, the advantages and disadvantages of the single market. So the advantages and disadvantages of the single market is one potential discussion question. And then explain and evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of the single currency. Now there have been quite a few questions in the past asking candidates to evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of the single market, but there haven't been any with regard to the advantages and disadvantages of the single currency, and therefore that's potentially an area in which you might wish to focus a little bit more of your revision time. And so I've written you a few potential exam questions here, which you can obviously at your leisure you can work through. Starting off with the very straightforward ones as we've seen, and then into some more difficult ones here which you can really get your teeth into. Now these ones here, 1 to 6, these predominantly relate to the next figure. There's not a lot probably that you're going to be asked about this one, but once we get into figure 7, where it talks about Lithuania and Lithuania's decision to adopt the euro and some of the advantages and disadvantages that go alongside of that. So you may wish to just have a little bit of a think about why some Lithuanians feared price rises. You'll not remember, but back in 1999, 2000, 2001, when the euro was first introduced, there was all sorts of fears and worries with regard to price rises because people thought that shopkeepers, businesses, would really take advantage and take the opportunity to get the arm in really at a time when people were switching from one currency to another, and people thought, oh well, businesses will think we're a little bit daft and they'll just hike the prices up because we're switching to this new currency. So this is not a new phenomenon. I've gone, certainly with my students, probably a little bit above and beyond what's necessary, but I think it's worth doing. So outlining the Maastricht criteria and the convergence criteria for those countries that wish to adopt the euro. This is primarily to do with the percentage of debt to GDP, the size of the budget deficit to GDP, and we've looked at that in a little bit of detail. Explain what's meant by the Stability and Growth Pact and a one-size-fits-all interest rate policy. So again, this is with regard to how much governments who join the Eurozone, how much they can then borrow. So we're talking about they must have a budget deficit which is no more than, well, greater than, no more than 3% of their GDP, and their national debt must be no more than 60% of GDP. And we've talked about the fact that that's a great hindrance to economies when they're actually in the Eurozone, because fiscal policy really is their only tool that they can manipulate their economy. And so if an economy is in recession in the Eurozone, one way that they can get out of it is spend their way out of it. But if you've got this straitjacket of the Stability and Growth Pact, whereby you have to limit your borrowing and spending, that really hinders an economy's ability to grow and to push itself in a sort of Keynesian way, to push itself out of a recession. And then similarly, a one-size-fits-all interest rate policy. You'll know that this is one of the great drawbacks of being a member of the Euro, in that there is one interest rate for every member state. So for the 19 members of the Euro, there is only one interest rate. Now, that is all very well if all countries and all economies are at the same stage of their economic cycle. So if you need a low interest rate for one economy, it fits them all. But of course, all of the economies in the Eurozone are not at the same stage of their economic cycle. They need different monetary policies. So Germany might need a higher one because it's doing relatively better than, for example, Greece, which would need a very low one given the dire straits that it's in. And so as a consequence of that, this one-size-fits-all policy, again, this is monetary policy being tied up. We already know that fiscal policy is tied up, and so an economy's ability to manoeuvre within the Eurozone area is very, very restricted. It's like wearing a straitjacket. The only policy left, as you know, of the three policy instruments, we've got our monetary, our fiscal, then we've got supply-side policy. As you know, supply-side policies can take an enormous length of time to actually implement. So this is one of the great problems of being a member of the Eurozone. Now that is not, of course, to say that there are not advantages, because of course there are advantages. There is the fact that the currencies do not fluctuate against one another. So in Spain we used to have the Spanish peseta, in France we had the French franc. And when currencies are fluctuating against one another, this deters trade between nations, because it deters export trade, it deters import trade. When you've got one currency and they're all fixed against one another, this of course is very, very beneficial to trade. It's also very beneficial if you're a tourist and you're travelling. You don't have to change your currency from the Spanish peseta to the French franc to the Italian lira and so on and so forth. So this is also good for tourism. It's also good for competition, because if you want to buy, let's say you want to buy a Volkswagen car, and you want to buy it in the cheapest place, obviously. Well, you can just look across every member state, see what the price is in euro, and then choose the cheapest one. Years ago, before the euro, you would have had to have looked at the different prices in the different currencies, convert to whichever currency you're looking at, and then make up your mind as to which is cheapest. So that in itself is, it's number one, it's costly in terms of time, but it's also it's inconvenient, isn't it? Okay, with reference to figure 2, explain why the Stability and Growth Pact and the one-size-fits-all policies effectively disable member nations' fiscal and monetary policies. That's what I've just talked about. Explain how further integration would help boost trade and cut currency exchange costs. So we've just mentioned that. So trade is much more likely to take place on a Eurozone-wide basis when all economies are using the same currency, because we do not have these fluctuations against one another. The currencies are not fluctuating against one another. That promotes more stability, and with stability comes certainty, and hence comes trade. And then lastly, evaluate the extent to which the adoption of the single currency would be advantageous excuse me, to the Lithuanian economy. So again, this is a discussion question. Outline all the pros, outline all the cons, then come to a judgment at the end of it. Excuse me. Now, as a catch-all here at the end, I've said be prepared for potential questions about the single market. Now, as I've said, that's been on a few times in the past. My students have certainly done that a few times now on past papers, so I don't think that that is as likely, but of course we don't know that for sure. So let's have a look back to the pre-release material. So really, I've covered now figures 6 and 7, so that's those two, and then that brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to these last two, figures 8 and 9, which are of course exchange rates. Okay, it is so important, ladies and gentlemen, that you get, number one, your interpretation of these correct. So here we have the value of the euro in US dollar, here we have the value of the euro in UK pounds. In both instances, ladies and gentlemen, the value of the euro is depreciating. Very important that you get that right from the offset. The value of the euro is depreciating. So if you need to spend a little bit of time looking at these and just getting that straight in your mind, make sure that you do that. So 1 euro on the 2nd of January 2013 bought just about $1.32. 1 euro in 2nd of January 2015 bought $1, let's call it 13, something like that. So the euro is not buying as many US dollar, therefore the value of the euro is depreciating. Secondly, the value of the euro to pounds. 2nd of January 2013, the euro bought about, let's say, 8.81 cents, isn't it? And then, sorry, where are we? 2nd of January 2013, what am I talking about? So 1 euro bought around about 81 pence. And by the time we get to 2nd of January 2015, 1 euro is buying about 74 pence, something like that. And again, the value of the euro is weakening or depreciating. Make sure that you use the correct terminology when you're analysing these, this set of data. So the correct terminology is that it has depreciated. It is weakened in value. So you're probably going to get 1 or 2 questions simply asking you to interpret the data, first of all. Then they'll probably ask you something, I'm sure there'll be some type of question on this, given that this is the final figures 8 and 9, so we're looking at an evaluate question certainly at the end of this. So you're probably going to get some type of questions with regard to maybe how this would impact the competitiveness of goods which are coming out of Euroland, the countries who are using the euro as their currency, how this would impact their competitiveness in the United States and in the UK. Now obviously I hope you know that the golden rule is the export price moves in the same direction as the currency. So if the value of the euro is depreciating in both of these instances, the value of and the price of exports coming out of the eurozone will also be falling. So you can then talk about the fact that if prices of exports are falling, the demand for exports will be lifting and rising. The flip side of the same coin is, of course, import prices. So if export prices are falling, import prices are rising. If demand for exports are going up, demand for imports will be falling. And again, of course, then you get into the whole notion of discussing the trade position. So whether or not we have a trade deficit, or whether or not Euroland would have a trade deficit or a trade surplus. And again, careful with your definitions of these things. Trade surplus is where the value of exports, and it's the value, not the quantity, the value of exports are greater than the value of imports. Flip side, trade deficit, the value of imports greater than the value of exports. And I'm sure, well, as sure as one can be, I'm sure that the evaluation question on this will be relating to the exports the exchange rates, export and import prices, and then into the trade position. So you'll be asked, I'm sure, to consider what might happen to the Eurozone's trade position. So you go along the lines of, well, it's most likely to move into surplus because export prices are cheaper, all of the things that we've just mentioned. And then obviously on the flip side of that, the evaluate is, well, now give me some reasons why that might not happen. Why might cheaper export prices not lead to an increase in demand? So there you'd be talking about things such as the price elasticity of demand, for one. So if the price elasticity of demand was very inelastic, even if export prices fell, quantity demanded would not go up very significantly. If the quality of goods coming out of Euroland was very poor, well, just because they're cheaper then, more people will not necessarily buy them. If household incomes in the UK and the United States were falling, then cheaper export prices might not yield significant increases in demand. So there are a whole host of things that you can put into that type of answer. And again, on this Word document then, I have written for you, number one, we've got the areas of the specification, which this is looking at. So explain what's meant by an exchange rate, understand and illustrate how exchange rates are determined, simple demand and supply diagram, understand the factors which might influence interest rates. So again, you would need to be aware of factors which might increase the demand for a currency or increase the supply of a currency. You should be familiar with all of those. So demand would be things such as changes in the interest rate, increased demand for exports, increase in tourism into the economy, increased foreign direct investment into the economy. And then again, this evaluate. Now the trade position. Note well, ladies and gentlemen, do not start talking about the budget deficit and the budget surplus. It's the trade deficit and the trade surplus. This happens so often and it's so careless. Make sure you don't do it. And then, ladies and gentlemen, I've got some questions here for you, which you can obviously work through at your leisure. And these are the potential questions I think might appear with regard to this extract. So I hope that's been of help to you. Any questions, do get in touch. Keep watching, keep subscribing, and see you next time.